Hello, and welcome to the 18th century. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about George Washington and Satoshi Nakamoto. Two big figures, two different time frames. On one hand, you've got Washington, who leads the country on the battlefield during the Revolutionary War. And on the other hand, you've got Satoshi, who discovered this thing called Bitcoin. Washington defeats Britain during the Revolutionary War and comes back as basically the most famous American in history, at least at the time. Benjamin Franklin was arguably the most famous American before then, probably the only American that most people could identify before the war was over. But Washington comes back and decides that, even though he's the general, even though he has the army, he's going to do something that most people in history have not done given the opportunity, which was walk away from the power. He decided to walk away from his role in the military in large part and avoided public life for a very short period of time. Then he was brought back. Most everyone wanted him to come back, and eventually took up as our first president. He effectively could have been president for life, almost like a dictator or kingship. But he walked away from it, and he knew that he was doing that not for his own legacy, but for the security of the country as it moved forward. He was worried about the health of the young nation, the health of the Constitution, how long would it survive, and he knew that the peaceful transfer of power was something that had to occur. So we only know Satoshi as Satoshi, but we're fairly certain that's not her real name, because we don't know who they are. All we know is that they created Bitcoin and released it into the wild. And once it was in the wild, other people adopted it, and then more people, and then more people. And once Bitcoin became relatively stable enough for him to walk away, he walked away. And we could say, oh, well, he probably still has a bunch of Bitcoin left over that he's going to cash out one day. Well, I think he would have done it at this point. Satoshi, after he created Bitcoin, he mined Bitcoin at a rate of roughly 50 Bitcoins per block reward, which would have been every 10 minutes. So he was earning 50 odd Bitcoin or less every 10 minutes for a reasonable period of time. And once everything was said and done and he had stepped away, we knew which Bitcoin wallets were the first wallets. So we could see if the first coins ever moved from their first wallet, and they never did. At one point, whoever controls Satoshi's wallets were the 41st richest person in the world. I think if money was the motivation, at that point you might decide to check out. I mean, they talk about diamond hands, but that's a lot. So you would suspect that if the motivation was money or control or power, that Satoshi would have already taken it. Now, since then, that was 2008, 2009 when Bitcoin first hit the scene. Fast forward to today, that's 14 years ago, and Bitcoin's all over the world. It's possible that it's going to replace really every form of currency on the planet. At that point, you have to wonder, was Satoshi like Washington? Was he able to walk away from power when nobody else could to ensure the success of the thing that he wanted to move forward? Washington stepped away because he knew that if he didn't, it would set a precedent for the next person whenever he did finally step away from the presidency to become the standard for the next president to just be president for life. And I think some people wanted that, but Washington knew better, just like Satoshi knows better or knew better. If Satoshi were to spend, if they're alive, if Satoshi were to spend a coin out of their wallet today, I think there'd be a big response from the world. Obviously the Bitcoin world would notice, but I think the rest of the world would notice too. Simply because without a leader, in the form of Satoshi, without a leader, the majority of Bitcoin is anonymous. And it's very difficult to attack anonymous entities, especially when none of them actually control anything. Satoshi got whatever he wanted to accomplish. His last message was basically, I'm moving on to other projects. really like a nonchalant deal. Right around the time he left, the CIA was learning about Bitcoin, and we know that because one of the people who were one of the initial recipients of Bitcoin, part of a group called the Cypherpunks, one of them was asked by the CIA to come and talk about it, and he did. And wasn't very long after that, Satoshi went dark, moving on to other projects. But you have to ask yourself today, if Satoshi doesn't control it, and it's running all over the globe, who does control it? And that's kind of the moral of the story here, is that no one controls it. It exists outside of humanity, such as something like oil or gold or water. It's just a thing that exists in our world now. Anyone can try to stop it, but it's almost impossible. You'd have to shut down Bitcoin everywhere across the globe at the same time. And it would really require more resources than it would be worth, because you would probably fail and somebody would start it up and it would be very easy to do so. So it really isn't worth your time to try. It may have been in the past, but not anymore. So we have Satoshi in Washington, two people who walked away from power, both leaving behind a legacy of, or an example of what you can do to help move something along, even if it costs you the fame and notoriety that would be given if you decided to go the opposite direction. No power, no control. Washington retired. Satoshi did something. Maybe they're alive or dead. Maybe they're working on Bitcoin right now underneath their real name or a different name. Maybe they go to Bitcoin conferences. Maybe he just doesn't care about Bitcoin. Maybe he doesn't believe in the project. We don't know. All we know is that he isn't here. He isn't operational anymore with his name. So that's how Bitcoin started. Bitcoin started by a guy named Satoshi that wanted to do something different and wasn't in it for himself. No one controls it. It's spreading all across the globe and has been for 14 years. And in fact, if you think about it, it's the longest running human record that is verifiable with mathematical guarantees that everything that we think that has happened within the Bitcoin network has happened. It's first. That's never occurred in human history before. So since Bitcoin was turned on, since Satoshi flipped the switch has never gone off. It's never been disrupted. Most of us have lost power, cable, or internet multiple times over the past 14 years. But Bitcoin has, every 10 minutes or so, made more blocks, processed transactions, did everything it was supposed to do. There you have it. That's Bitcoin. That's Satoshi. That's a little bit about Washington. There you go. Happy mining.